Ladies and gentlemen, welcome this evening on behalf of the John Adams Institute. It's an honor to have here tonight Marsha Hunt. This is a multifunctional lady. She can sing, act, dance, perform, write, and be a mother at the same time. But I think motherhood comes first.
Yes.
Marsha will be introduced by Mijnhijmer. She is an actress, translator, and she coordinates the Authors Laboratory for DNA, de Nieuw Amsterdam, a multicultural theater group. There will be, in about an hour, a short intermission, and after the hour, Jenny will lead the question and answer period, in which you are kindly welcome to participate. Enjoy your evening.
This is good, huh? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, we have in our midst a woman who can be regarded as a truly artistic person. Truly artistic. Can you hear me? Truly artistic because she is an actress and a singer as well as a writer. Marsha Hunt has had a colorful and successful career in theater, film, and in literature. She was born in Philadelphia and studied at Berkeley in California. After her studies, she starred in the hit musical Hair, and that role put her face on the cover of practically every magazine in America, and the show took her to London. There she has worked in radio and on screen, and performed with both the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre. During her time in London, she had a daughter, Caris, who recently graduated from Yale. Marsha's literary career began in 1986, when Real Life, her autobiography, was published. This was the first of 3 books that have been published up until this time. Her latest novel, Free, deals with the damage of childhood and the damage of history and the love between 2 men. Her first fictional novel, Joy, deals with the problems of different generation African American women. It is a remarkable, intense, and intricate novel that explores the structures of the African American society in general and that of African American women in particular. With its skillful, subtle, and painful handling of the African American woman in a white-dominated world, it has put her among the ranks of Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and Alice Walker. If we look at the historic timetable, we see that there has been a significant emergence of strong female African American writers over the last 2 decades. Most literature by African Americans appearing from the 30s through the early 60s was written by men and appeared to be aimed at white audiences, telling them who African Americans were and how they had been wronged. Over the last 15 years or so, a fair number of female African American authors appeared on the scene. Also, there no longer seems to be such a strong need for African American writers to create and justify their existence. The fact that the voices of numerous African American women began to be heard from the middle of the 70s can be directly linked to the women's liberation movement. During the 60s, the main focus for African Americans had been the civil rights struggle. In the 70s, with the birth of women's lib, the need for self took priority. In the 80s, we entered the period of the new black aesthetic. This phrase has been coined by Trey Ellis, and he believes that contemporary African American artists now create art where race is not the only source of conflict. He feels that, quote, new African American artists are no longer shocked by racism as were those of the Harlem Renaissance, nor are they preoccupied with it as were those of the Black Arts movement. For the new African American artist, racism is a hard and little changing constant that neither surprises nor enrages, unquote. When we go back and look at the work of Marsha Hunt, when we look at the novels Joy and Free, we see that she fits into this new generation of African American writers. She writes honestly, intensely, poetically and proficiently about interhuman relationships and the drama that is life. The themes that she addresses are modern and yet ancient: homosexuality, incest, rape, child abuse, the damage of childhood, drug dependency, prostitution, racism, sexism. All are subtly interwoven in her writing to form a bright tapestry of human emotions. She knows how to combine comedy and tragedy and has a very keen ear for dialogue. The resulting mixture sometimes takes your breath away and makes for excellent reading. Tonight I am very proud that I may introduce this remarkable woman, and Marsha will speak about being an actress and a writer, how the two influence each other. She will talk about being an expatriate and how that affects her writing, and she will also talk about the theme of homosexuality in her books. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Marsha Hunt.
So I'm going to stand. Can you all hear me? At the back, you can hear me? Thank you for my introduction. And first I'd like to say I'm not a tree. And I'm not a bird. And I'm not a building. And it always strikes me as sort of extraordinary when I have to be identified in a particular way other than being called a human being. My daughter just graduated from university. I live in France, by the way. Let me give you a little crazy quick history here. I'm American, yes. At 19, I decided I was going to take a trip to London, a little holiday away from home, and never went back. Didn't do it intentionally, just found I was having a really good time every day, and discovered after 3 years I hadn't been home for 3 years. So in a way it makes me a little nervous when I hear that I'm an expatriate, because I'm not sure that I ever left. I just haven't gone back. And I have to say that I spent the majority of my time living in London, more by accident than by design. What happened was I arrived there at 19. I was a student studying anthropology at Berkeley, and I thought I was going to take a holiday in Paris, and I left with $5 in my pocket. And I bought a packet of Cool cigarettes, a carton of them on the airplane. So by the time I got off, I had $1.83, and the man at the douane said, "Excuse me, you can't come into England with $1.83. And I panicked and went on a hunger strike and did all sorts of extraordinary things. And they finally actually let me in. I start all this to say that when you hear me speak, you'll hear influences of the English in me, because I've spent more time in England actually than I have living in America. That in 1989 I bought a house in France so that I could write and use it as a studio. It sounds kind of grand and ritzy, but I assure you that I don't have a great deal of money, that I made this expenditure because I desperately wanted to write and knew that I had to find a place to do that, and you couldn't do it in England. So I now live in France. That's what, this is the long, circuitous route to say I live in France. And while I was in France, my daughter had two friends who came last year. They had just graduated from Yale. They were seniors. They were the year older than she was. And they arrived at the house. They were both, whether you would like to call them black or African American, they were two beautiful boys. And they stood in my garden and they talked about the fact that they, as African Americans, were here in France and they were going to do some work. And I said, hey guys, you know, you're standing here in the garden. I know for sure that you're not a bird and I know for fucking positive you're not a tree, and you're not air, and you're not the garage, and you're out of the United States for a minute, so you really here in this garden are safe enough to call yourself just a human being. You do not need to identify yourself as a socio-political entity who can only be identified through some label. So with great respect, I accept the fact that in time I have become an African American. I also remember being colored. I'm 46, so I remember being a Negro for some time of my life. I have got on the wrong side of people and been called a nigger at certain times. But basically, I'd like to stand in front of you and say that we are all the same, and we are all human beings. And in my work, I try to address the fact that that the language and culture separates us, creates schisms, creates problems. We do exist as human beings beyond our socio-political definition. And I have to say that I'm delighted to look out at the audience and see God knows how many different kinds of colors and races of people, and that I actually find it very unusual. Not very long ago, I gave a talk at the National Theatre in London about books, and it was sort of staggering to look out at the audience and see one face that was the color of mine. So here in Amsterdam, I have to say that I think you're already ahead of the game, that we're all out here in troops as human beings together. Anyway, so that's enough about the socio-political definition of who I am. I now want to say, too, that although I love the fact that people make a big deal of my having crossed artistic barriers, that basically I've done all these jobs because I've been trying to feed myself and my child, and that my child, who's now 22 and doesn't need feeding anymore, was for a long time somebody who I felt required a very special education because she was a special girl and I needed money to do that, and I worked hard to create that money. So somebody called me on the phone and said, "Hi Marsha, we've got an acting job here, would you like to do it?" I would say sure if I was unemployed. Or, "Hi Marsha, would you consider becoming a radio presenter?" Unqualified though I was, if I was unemployed, I would say sure. Now, it must aggravate the hell out of people that I have not focused on one area of art. But I truly stand here as a woman and say that it was by accident, that it wasn't somebody calling me to say, "Hi, we've got a job at this Chinese restaurant. Could you come down and wait a table?" Because depending on, whether the school fees had been paid or not, I would have considered it quite seriously and done it with a little pride. Jenny didn't mention that during the time I did all these things, I also cleaned people's houses. Did that with a little pride too. Would see my face in a magazine and think, fuck the magazine, that's not going to feed me today. Maybe it's really necessary that I, find some way to make money. And I literally did sometimes have to call a rich friend and say, totally broke, refuse to accept charity, you know how good I am at polishing, I'll be around soon, how much are you going to pay me? Writing came because I was tired of that. I thought, hey, wait a minute, why is my life this design of, waiting for my phone to ring, for somebody to call me, I don't want to be that anymore. I was at the National Theatre in England in a very prestigious job. I was playing Hippolyta in A Midsummer Night's Dream with Paul Scofield playing Oberon. It was a very, I won't say it was a very dignified production, but I felt as an American ex-ghetto girl pretty dignified kind of being there, Hippolyta had so few lines. Sure, I got the billing, and I got the fancy dressing room, And when people said to me, what do? I got to say, I'm at the National Theatre in Midsummer Night's Dream. But in actual fact, the contribution that I was making to the world was very limited. And I thought, now wait a minute, there is more than I can give to life than this. So somebody came along and they wanted to talk to me about the rock and roll business. Not many people these days mention rock and roll in my life, probably because the word is passé. But I'm actually 46 years old, and I was around when rock and roll was supposed to be the thing to do, and did it. And somebody came to the National Theatre dressing room, a very well-known English poet by the name of Andrew Motion, came to talk to me about a non-fiction book he was writing about the Lamberts. Now, the Lambert family is a very distinguished English family that incorporated Constant Lambert, who was a conductor of the London Symphony Orchestra, his father, who was a very well-known Australian painter, and his son, Kit, who became a rock and roll manager, and that's where I came in. Kit discovered me while I was in a show called Hair, and recorded me with my first record, as so he did The Who and Jimi Hendrix. So back in the 60s, in very good company, I was cutting rock and roll records, and I was involved with Kit Lambert. So when Andrew Motion came to talk about him, I had a lot to say about the 60s and what I thought it represented. I didn't think it represented any of the things that other people thought it represented. I had a lot to say about it. And 2 years later, and this was really lucky and wonderful, Andrew became a commissioning editor at a book publishing house, a noted book publishing house in England called Chatto and Windus. And he called and said, would you write a book about your life? And I said, absolutely not. Enough people have trashed my life in the newspapers that I don't want to participate in writing about my life. Because it was sort of 1985, and people like Britt Eklund were writing about their lives with Rod Stewart, and and in as much as my 22-year-old daughter is also Mick Jagger's daughter, I realized that why they wanted me to write about my life was not because they wanted to know how I sometimes cleaned houses when I got broke. They wanted to hear maybe how well hung he was, or who I knew that he knew that I could tell dish on him, or do you know what I mean? So I thought, no. And I said to Andrew, no, I don't want to do this. And he said, no, you've got this wrong. I talked to you, and I really think that you have something to say that's individual about your life. Will you go write a book about it? And I wasn't sure, but I knew that I didn't want to do bit parts at the National Theatre for high prestige profile anymore. So I thought, well, I've been writing songs as somebody in the rock and roll business, maybe I should try my hand at it. And I went away to write a book that's not available to you, but I'll hold it up and show it to you, and it's called Real Life. And I called it that because what I tried to indicate in this book was that in spite of the fact that I'm associated with all these glamorous occupations, behind the scenes is this person struggling just to kind of pay bills and live and be. It turned out that it was a much harder job than I had imagined, that somehow or other when I was given the opportunity to cut a record, I did that with certain ease. When I was given the opportunity to dance on a public stage, I did it with certain ease. Writing about my life was hideous. And why it was hideous was I realized when I had to tell somebody else about what my life had been, my life had been horrible. And I didn't know that. I didn't know it because just as I stand here before you now and can make fun of who I am and what I've been, I denied a lot of the shit that had happened to me. Denial's important. Denial is one of the things that lets us get by. Do we agree with that?
Yeah.
That if you don't have money to pay the bills, you know what I do? I don't open the envelope. I take the envelope and I put the envelope in the kitchen. There are so many unopened envelopes in the kitchen. Now this I tell you all my life, that you know the big garbage bags? In January I had about 4 full of envelopes, and a friend came by and said, "What are you doing? You've got to open some of these envelopes." Some of the envelopes were 2 years old. And it was so exciting to open them because you realize, oh, I paid that bill. That's not important. I can deal with that. So in any case, here was me who had endured a life of denial. I discovered that, my father committed suicide when I was 9 years old. And the way that I could so easily tell people was I made a story out of it. I didn't think about me, the child who stood with her mother in the basement, being told that my dad was dead. I thought about how I ran out to the park with my brother and I heard my dad commit suicide, and I went to my friend's house and I told her mother, and what was more important that day was they had this Persian cat and I loved the cat, and I was important because that day, because something had happened to me that didn't happen to everybody else. But it was like suddenly, as a writer, I was left in this room by myself when I'd come home from the theater, because I wrote this book while I was doing a play. And I would have to sit and look at my life clearly enough so that if somebody else was reading about it, they would understand the experience. They would be able to see in the corner. They would understand why I denied what I had experienced. So anyway, I won't dramatize this, but I'll say it was hard. That year and a half of writing about my life was hard. And what was even harder than looking at my life and what I had been through, whether it was lawsuits with Mick Jagger or being trashed by the press because they wanted to treat me as groupie of the year that week or whatever it was. What was even harder was the fact that I could not write. And that whereas I thought writing was like you say something and then you scribble it down on the page, and this was like you'd look at what you wrote the week before and it was like, I swear, it was like you have vomited and somebody tells you, go pick up a couple good pieces out of it. Well, it was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? The world is expecting this book from me and I've accepted the advance money already. And I'm going to go to jail and they are going to find out I am fucking illiterate. I totally panicked. And what was shocking was that Andrew Motion, who was my editor, he's so panicked about the fact that he's an editor, he has forgotten to ask me for the book until it's due. So he calls my agent and says, where's the book? Well, if they could have seen the day they called my house, and I'm staying in digs because I'm doing this play, the house was well, it was like the envelopes I didn't open. When the page was too bad, I'd stick it in the kitchen or hang it on the wall in the living room, but I would never read it and I would never look at the fact that it was badly written. Well, I have to say that book got published. I really don't know how. I will swear on my life that I didn't have a ghostwriter. I will say that it is not very particularly good. But what it allowed me to do was have the experience of writing, to understand that denial wasn't just mine, denial was the whole world's. And I only did what other people did, was laughed and got over and laughed and got on and endured and got over. And so this hurt, because it hurt to see that whereas with certain ease I could bluff my way as a singer, I could bluff my way even as an actress, I could bluff my way as a television presenter, I could not bluff the blank page. It tells no lies. It's either there or it's not there. It works or it doesn't work. So anyway, I finished the book and the publisher hates it and there's not enough kiss and tell in it, and no, you will not find out anything about Mick Jagger in here that you have not already read in the press about it. I'll save that one for later. And what happened was I decided I'm going to try this again, because I hated feeling that I'd been beaten by the blank page, you know. And I thought, wait a minute, I can be passionate about writing. I'm going to get this fixed, and I'm going to go write another book. And the book that I wanted to write was a book about mothering, because Anne alluded to it slightly when she introduced me and said, you know, what's the most important thing in your life? And it was actually being a mom. I loved it. I loved having a baby. I loved the responsibility of ironing underwear. And I became a stronger person being a mother, because whereas someone might challenge me and I would back up a couple steps and be humble on my own behalf, if somebody challenged my daughter, they might have been challenging a lion, because I was ready to kill somebody at any time that threatened her. So I thought what I'd be good at doing was writing a book about mothering. And, you know, I'd been a single parent and I hadn't had a husband and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, well, you know, there's a lot I can say about this and add a kind of hip. You know, it won't be Dr. Spock, it'll be kind of, you know. And I went to an agent and I said, I've got this, you know, I'm going to write this book about mothering. And he looked at me like, have you lost your mind? I don't want to read that. And he said, no. What you should write is a novel. And I said, I can't write a novel. I have no imagination. I have no sense of dialogue. This is impossible, and this is not going to happen. He said, look, will you just go home and see what you can come up with in a rock and roll novel? Well, I nearly vomited in his office because, you know, I've been in the rock and roll business for that many years that I knew it was boring, that most of the people were illiterate, that it was all about money and bullshit, and, you know, when you write a book, it takes a long time, and I just thought, I don't want to dedicate, you know, a whole lot of my time to looking at that. But on the other hand, one thing that I decided that he probably knew better than I did was the market for it and what the market required. So I thought, well, hey, what I can try to do here is look at somebody outside of the rock and roll business and see how they would perceive some of those experiences I had. And when I was 14 years old, we moved from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, my family, to Oakland, California. And the lady who lived across the hall from us, we didn't have money. The lady across the hall from us was a cleaner and devoted, and everything that my mother had avoided in my life because she didn't speak English terribly well, she wasn't interested in education, and these were all things that my mother had put on a very high pedestal in our lives. I loved this woman. I loved to be in her house. I loved to smell the weird food that she cooked and the greens and hear her talk and see her get dressed up on Sunday to go to church. We were Catholic. They were holy rollers and, you know, like totally into this very simplistic Black American, African American, whatever you want to call it, culture. And I loved her to death. And eventually I left her behind until the day came to write my rock and roll book. And I thought two things had hit me very strongly. One is that my best friend had died. And the other was that I could still hear her voice. And I thought, I'm going to amalgamate these three things, and I'm going to write a book about my friend dying, and I'm going to write a book about her, and I'm going to somehow inveigle rock and roll in it enough so this man that wants this rock and roll book thinks he's getting the rock and roll book. And that's what this is about. Can I read a little bit of it to you? This character is called Baby Palatine, and we meet her in the 90s, and largely she has flashbacks. Is this on? No. No, it doesn't need to be. I was just going to move it if it wasn't. Okay. Baby Palatine, and the book is called Joy. Like usual, a few mornings ago, I was laying in the bed next to Freddie B, staring at the ceiling and listening to him snore while I waited for his 6:45 alarm to go off. I always wait for it buzzes, and sometimes it's worrying to hear that old noisy clock of his tickety-tick by seconds that won't never get another chance. But I've resigned myself to listening to it because he can't rest good at night till he see a set. Even though he know for all them 40-some years we've been married, I wake at least a half hour for it, that alarm, no matter what time it's set for. And I rue today, I bought him that old ugly square-faced clock, and I wish I could throw it out sometime. What really don't make no sense is he like to set it on a little shelf by my side of the bed. I said, what's the good of that? I asked him. I'm the one being waking. But he don't bother to answer. That's his way. When he can't think of a good answer, he don't say nothing. Playing like he don't hear, and he hear good as me and anybody else when he want to. Well, I knew he wouldn't budge when that bedside phone started going, so the minute it did, I reached over and quick to pick it up, though I was half tempted to leave it ringing, because I suspected it might have been that wicked wench in 207 on the 4th floor, calling for the umpteenth time to complain about the water pressure being too weak in her shower. Not but the week before I had to put her straight. I didn't miss my words neither, because tenants will sure take liberties with you if you do. I said, just because we manage in the building, Miss Gonzalez, don't mean you can ring us all hours of the day and night. She tried to claim that with Freddie B usually holding down a day job, she thought the best try to catch him for work. But like I told her, my husband ain't no plumber, and plumbing ain't what we do. Maintenance is all, and if you want you a plumber, Miss Gonzalez, call you one. We ain't nothing but glorified cleaners, and I didn't mind saying it because we took on a building this size. The man that interviewed Freddie B down at the real estate agency promised that my husband could keep his construction work as long as he could find time to put out the garbage and see to the halls and the stairs and the elevators for the 16 apartments. And see, I'm the one to do most of that. If we had to mess with all else in this half-baked building, wouldn't be time to scrub your teeth in the morning. But see, the hussy in 207 seemed determined to want to get my husband down in her place because she keep calling for a daybreak about that shower. So when I hauled the phone over to my side of the bed, I was right ready to give her a mouthful. But luckily I didn't start straight in because it wasn't her. It was Tammy, Joy's mama. I peered at the clock thinking, now, if it's 6:20 here in San Francisco where we was, it wasn't but 9:20 for her over in Richmond, Virginia. And knowing how much she liked to sleep late, I figured she wasn't just crawling a jaw. For a start, she wasn't pronunciating every word like usual. See, Tammy liked to give off like she educated. She didn't get no further than high school like the rest of them. But don't make me no difference if she liked to take airs. That's her way. But since Joy told her years ago to stop correcting me all the time, I don't feel like I gotta watch every word with Tammy, and I just say out what I got to, you know. So I say, Tammy, what What you ringing my phone for at this hour, girl? You ain't got nothing better to do than be calling folks at the crack of dawn. There was a time when she lived over across the bay in East Oakland. She used to try and call me at least once a day. But ever since she got hitched up with that cop from Chicago after he retired, they moved on back to Virginia. She don't hardly call me no more. It's Joy keep me posted on what Tammy's doing. Not that Joy stay in touch with her mama all that much. Tammy asked me, Baby Palatine, are you sitting down? I laughed. Girl, are you kidding? My black behind's still in the bed and I'm proud of it. But me funning and bad talking didn't put her in no jokey mood. She said, well, I got bad news. See, now Tammy thrives on bad news. And given half a chance, she can spin a sad story out, especially if it's about somebody else. You know, listening to her can be more entertainment than them afternoon soap operas. But that early in the morning, I wasn't ready to hear no long, drawn-out tale. So I asked her to make it quick because I needed the toilet, which wasn't altogether a lie. She said, I didn't know if you still turn on Good Morning America as soon as you got up, because I'd hate to think you heard it first on the news. That would be terrible. Well, I sat bolt upright in my bed. And I reached for my glasses, but they wasn't where I left them on the side table. See, I can't think real good till I got them on. And her sorry-sounding voice, I needed to be in a clear state of mind. She said, I got an unfortunate phone call a couple hours ago. I interrupted, Tammy, what's up? But what I really wanted to add was I didn't need none of her suspense. And it was way too early in the morning to put up with one of her melodramas. She can turn a canker sore into lip cancer or a pot burning into a 4-alarm fire. And she good at getting me going. Freddie B said she should have been a politician or something because she got sharp at getting folks riled up about nothing. He said the only reason she bothers with me is she can get me in a rampage so quick. But true as that is, she is much like family to me as her 3 girls. And I wouldn't have changed that for nothing, even though I wasn't in the mood to have her calling me at no 6:20 in the a.m. I said, Tammy, my poor husband is trying to sleep. And it ain't fair me hanging the phone with the cord stretched so tight across his neck he near to strangle while you don't say nothing. See, now, Freddie B, he sleep heavy as somebody in a coma. And I could have probably tied the telephone cord around his neck and he'd be choking the breath out of him and he wouldn't have stirred. But Tammy don't know that. She said, it's Joy. And waited long enough for the little tremor in her voice to give me goose flesh. Well, Joy was more like my daughter than she was hers. And for years, it was usually me calling Tammy with news of Joy, because Joy came to me before she went to anybody. You know, especially when she got into trouble, which wasn't all that often, but it was often to keep me on my toes. Now, if I'd have had a child, I reckon it would have made me mad if she always been rushing to me with her agitations and whispers. But then Tammy brought that on herself, because there was a time when I was ready to listen to her children and she wasn't. And from back then, Joy took on the habit of coming to me to share both the bad and the good. So I prepared myself to hear Tammy say what I had long predicted, which was that Joy had got herself arrested. Because with all that gadding about she did down south with Rex Hightower, that old redneck toothpick of a so-called boyfriend of hers, I warned Joy it wouldn't be long before some of them Okies found a reason to lock her up in a backwater jailhouse and throw away the key. She ran around like she thought she was some kind of blue-eyed blonde. I used to say, and point my finger in her face so she knew I meant business, nigga, don't forget what you are and where you are. And she let that good advice, you know, slide off her quicker than grease off a hot coat, because she was always slow to listen to what she didn't want to hear. But anyway, that's why I was scared Joy was in the South when she had phoned me at the weekend and wouldn't tell me where she was, nor where she was heading. Though I got used to her being secretive about things when it suited her, it didn't make me feel no easier. See, being from down south myself, I don't have no illusions about what goes on. No matter what the newspapers say about things that's changing, they ain't changing all that much for no colored girl to be flaunting herself with no white man especially no hillbilly singer that's rich and famous as Rex and got the girls throwing themselves at him. You know, like that big fat woman I seen at the Mayfair supermarket wearing one of them Rex is better than sex buttons. They give it away with his last record. I was itching to tell her I knew from reliable sources he couldn't get it up. But my better self told me not to because it wasn't Christian. So as soon as I knew that it was Joy that Tammy had phoned about, I didn't want Freddie B's clock to tick another second till I knew exactly what was going on. And through my night clothes, I could hear my heart just pounding like a jackrabbit, waiting on Tammy to get to the point while she coughed a couple times and cleared her throat. It's a nervous habit, she claimed, but I know it's her ruining her lungs with them cigarettes, water filters or no water filters. You know, it wasn't but 2 words she eked out, though, to end my Tuesday before it had a chance to start. She said, Joy's dead. I had to laugh. Say what? I had never heard of no such foolishness like that. She said, don't make me repeat it, baby Palatine, because it's hard enough to say it. You're the first person I had to utter these words to, because Jessie's not home, and I haven't been able to contact either Andorra or Brenda. So infuriating to have daughters you can't reach when you need them. But see, I had stopped listening to what she said. What was the point? Joy dead? It wasn't possible. She was light, and life, and sun, and stars, and everything glorious save God Himself. And to think that she wasn't somewhere on the planet, that was more I could take in. So I didn't. With my free hand, I just smoothed the covers over Freddie B and shifted him to where he didn't snore so loud. He bet on his back. While I didn't say nothing, neither did Tammy. We were both holding receivers that didn't seem to have anybody at the other end. Joy did. Thank you. Am I finished? No, I'm not finished. So that was the voice, and that was the woman who lived next door, and that was where I took my first story. And the blessing, the true blessing of this book was, you know, as a writer, what's really different from being a performer is that while I was even doing that reading, I can feel whether what I give you is worth anything, because you give me an honest response. Even if you want to be polite, I can honestly feel what you feel. I can feel when you turn off. I can feel when you laugh out of embarrassment or when you laugh for real. Because as much as I'm trying to touch you, you automatically are being honest within your response, and therefore you touch me. And what was scary about this experience was there I was alone, working on this character and working on this book. And very much like my autobiography, I really had no sense of whether what I was writing worked or didn't work, or I was really working in the dark. And I wrote 20,000 words, which is a lot of words, more than was required of my contract, because I thought they're going to need to throw a lot of this shit out. And I was shocked because they cut out a little line and cut out 3 lines, and by the end they cut out 10 lines, and they left the rest of my book together. And then my editor got shocked because she thought I had written this sort of trashy book about rock and roll as told by this old woman, and the English all jumped up and down and said, "This is literature." And it was deeply exciting because all of a sudden it was the Sunday Times, and do you know what I mean? It was just oh my God, we've written something serious here. But it is a serious book, and it talks about serious things, but I hope that the word joy, and it's why I call the book Joy, does not only apply to my central character, but applies to my heroine, who was a very poor woman who had a joie de vivre, who had a sense of life that, in spite of her own poverty, was as rich as anybody I've ever met, and I've met some very rich people. So that's Joy. Now I'm going to quickly, do you want to have a break first, or do you want me to go on to Free? Go on to Free? Okay. So Free is also a little bit related to my life, because as a young child, I lived in a community called Germantown, Pennsylvania. And what's important about Germantown, Pennsylvania, standing in this room, I'm sure you all know, being here in the Institute, that it was here that was it the trade order for the West India House?
The construction of Fort Amsterdam.
The construction of Fort Amsterdam, which is now New York City, Manhattan, whatever you want to call it, happened here. And I'm totally, as an American, into history, because we haven't got any. So anytime you got dealt any kind of little bits of history, when I was a child, I was so excited. I heard, for example, when I was 6 years old, that the school I went to was 100 years old. And in America, that was like, the school is 100 years old. Can you imagine? The floors have been here for 100 years. And I'm not exaggerating. It was like the big thing. So as this little child, I lived in the community known as Germantown from the time I was, I guess, 6 until I was about 9. And I became obsessed with the notion that walking around these streets, that George Washington had walked around these streets, and that the Battle of Germantown against the English army had been fought in this little community. And what's odd about it is that I actually wrote this book because so many of my friends died from AIDS. And I wanted to put something back, you know. And I wanted to write that the love between men can be beautiful. And I wanted to figure out a way to tell that. I also wanted to tell the story of America and how we get to be who we are, we Americans. Not African Americans, not Dutch Americans, not Italian Americans, but how this fucking mess of a country has got into the mess that it's in. And I felt that I saw it so clearly because of my own denial. And that when I spoke to you earlier about my experience writing my autobiography, and I said, denial's what helped me get over. If I can be vain for a moment, let me say I got over real fucking good, you know. Nobody knew that I was, you know, the embodiment of denial. I looked real happy, real successful, real on top of things. A little like America, you know. It looks real out front. But in actual fact, I believe that what was created here in this room, this thing that we call America, that part of the Dutch bought for 60 guilders all those years ago, became a rather desperate mistake, became elements of denial which are so deep in the root of who and what we are that we cannot face ourselves, yeah? And so I had two purposes with this story. I wanted to give something back to the gay community, which had given so much to me. So much to me by believing in me at times, my gay friends, when nobody else did. by managing to get my picture in Vogue magazine when other people said I was too ugly to have my picture taken. And I also wanted to say something about America and about things that I learned while I was writing that book about myself and things that I learned about this book when I was writing about a black heroine of mine. And this is a small and crazy story which the English have not been very happy about. The book's already come out in England. And I think one of the things that kind of freaked them out a little bit was that my central character is a black American stable boy, and opposite him is a young English Viscount. And I understand young English Viscounts. I've known a few, and I feel that I've lived in England long enough to not be deaf to the English language. So this is a picture of Germans and Quakers and blacks and Indians, and everything that I believe incorporates the country in which I associate myself, the place where I have my root. And it's largely about the Nile. And I'm not going to tell you a lot more about it, other than to say that Tinachi Sims, who is my central character, my little stable boy, has a relationship with this Viscount that is a rather extraordinary and delicate and wonderful relationship. And I hope that through telling about their friendship, that I ease some of the pressure that has been created in the world against the gay community through AIDS. I'd like to read just a tiny bit. I'm not going to read as much as I did before. Do you want me to read something? Tinachi's 19, and I open the story with him cleaning a house. And now that I've told you I was so good at cleaning house, I have to say that for this character who cleaned, I was really able to apply my skills. So developed. Tinachi's great denial is an experience that he saw when he was 5 years old. His mother is called Dusty. His sister is called Atlanta. And I'll read you now. You know what I'm going to tell you to do, just like little kids from kindergarten? If anybody has to cough, shake, rattle, do it right now. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Change your leg, do whatever. Okay? So we know that Dusty Sims is Tinachi's mother, and Tinachi in the story is grown up. He's 19, but here we find him at 5 years old. Dusty Sims disappeared on a normal Wednesday in late September 1899, in the twilight of an evening warmer than usual, when leaves crunched underfoot. And what Tinachi's mind was too injured to recall is what happened that night after he excitedly watched her don her black knitted shawl. He knew her almost as well as she knew him, little though he was, and he knew if he quietly played near the door, she might take him for what she called her evening stroll. She enjoyed his company and was always happy to have him along if Atlanta didn't take a fit and cry to go too. Tinachi knew as well as his mother that Atlanta was a chatterbox at 3 and too little to keep secrets, whereas he promised never to tell about the walks with his mother to meet Mr. Claver in the woods. And it was with special excitement that evening that they finally slipped out without Atlanta bellowing. The little boy would have skipped across Main Street, so happy was he not only to be going on the secret journey, but also that Atlanta had actually waved them goodbye, thanks to a sock doll Dusty Sims had produced as they left. She put it in her baby daughter's upstretched hands before the pretty child had a chance to cry. Dusty said to her, passing the sock doll with button eye, "This here's Suki." And that was all Atlanta needed. Once out of the door, the lean woman was soon in her stride and Tinachi had to take 3 steps to her long-legged one, so he was often panting by the time they reached Mr. Claver, waiting in the usual place near the underpass above the Wissahickon. The old man fussed the first time he saw her appear with the boy, but she protested, "Oh, Mr. Paul, holding hands and kissing ain't nothing, he ain't gonna tell." But nonetheless, Mr. Claver insisted that he and she talk out of Tinachi's view, and Tinachi liked showing off that he was brave enough to wait that 15 minutes alone while the noises of the wood got denser as the light turned to near darkness. Each time after, Tinachi was left to wait at the stump near the overpass, and Mr. Claver would ride off before Dusty reappeared, waving $1. Yet that September evening, he never appeared, and Dusty was on her way back to collect little Tinachi when the rustle of footsteps caught up with her. Tinachi was running towards her as 2 hatted men blocked her path. "What you want?" he heard his mother stammer, before a booted foot kicked in her eye and split her nose open in reply. "Run, Tinachi! Don't stop! Run on, baby, run on!" She spluttered from her knees as one stranger mounted her from behind, his burly mass crushing her to the ground. He was broader than the bearded one who'd first grabbed her skirt and clubbed her. Both yanked and twisted her flailing limbs like 2 pits on the same kill, and the one covered in a beard was beast-like in form and face, and his dirty claw wrenched her neck backwards to rip at her checkered blouse before he tore at her corset and then her breast. She squealed, "Run, Tinachi, don't stop! Run!" But his indomitable little spirit knew not to obey. Just this once, he couldn't do what she asked because his soul refused to desert her long wail that filled the air like a gull screeching for its mother. Fear froze Tinachi in a crouch beside the faithful stump that had on so many trips to that place been his safety point. And with his mother's cry, neither near nor far, he shivered and waited, shaking as he heard leaves and men wreathe and wrestle amid his mother's skirts until they tired of it and ripped it from her. "First one, this nigga's a real bobcat," the hairy one cackled. Tinachi's warm pee rushed down his leg, bringing him greater shame than his terror and his tears. He expected his mother to say, "Big boys don't cry and pee their pants," when she got him back home to box his ears for not running like she told him to. He expected her to say, "The boogeyman comes for boys that don't mind." But she didn't. And as he waited, his eyes bulged to hold back the boogeyman when dark crept in, making less noise than the night wind, which paralyzed his limbs and chased the men off. A bright moon braved the night air, but Tinachi was scared to look for the Big Dipper or the 7 sisters his mother used to show him. There was no star of Bethlehem. After his heart had run off, a tom-tom beat 10 to the dozen in its place. Noisy clinks and clanks in the kitchen had jolted him from worse nightmares before. But that September night, he cried, and there was no one to make him quit. And as morning broke around the 5-year-old, boys laughed, birds laughed and gossiped, and shadowy witches showed themselves as trees. Tinachi whimpered, somehow remembering he could speak. "Sister?" That's what he called his mother. "Sister?" When he heard a second call, well to a howl, he was more frightened than the wild fowl that flew for safety, and scrambling from the familiar folds of his mother's skirts, he stopped bawling when he could see her feet. Though rumpled and torn, her threadbare skirt was recognizable. So was her blue head rag and her black knitted shawl, though matted with leaves. But her face stifled her sobs. Her face. Her face. A swollen mass. A bloody pulp of cuts and bruises. "The boogeyman!" Tinachi screamed, but his spirit knew not to run. Filling his arms with brown leaves, he covered her. Armful after armful, he piled a leafy sepulchre to help her on her way. But having disobeyed, he looked to heaven for nothing. That night had flung him violently from the nest, and his soul merely clung to him for refuge. While other fledglings sang their morning's work, he teetered and tottered from thorny bush to tree in search of the familiar. Thank you.
We hebben nu een short break. Sam, is dat hier?
Kwartiertje.
Ja.
In the rain and on a Thursday and in November, and good God. Thank you very much for coming. And maybe Jenny has a couple questions to ask me, and then hopefully you'll have some questions to ask me. And they can be impertinent, and they don't have to be about books. So hold on.
Well, I'll start off with one question that I really want to know is, do you think you will ever write a play?
I thought I was going to write a play until this year. I was asked to go back to England to do the first play that Arthur Miller had written for 10 years. I'm going to stand up again. I feel when I'm sitting back there that I'm in an office somehow. Arthur Miller. I adore Arthur Miller's work. There was a whole year I walked around with Death of a Salesman in my pocketbook, and it was like carrying a Bible around. He has such an extraordinary facility for saying so much with so few words. And I had done a play of his at the National Theatre called The American Clock, and we had a very successful production. And when I was visiting my daughter once at Yale, I got a call from him to say that he had written his first play in 10 years, and would I consider doing a small part in it. And it was at the time that I was writing free, so I was tempted to say, no, I can't. But at the same time, I was so delighted and touched that I'd be asked that I decided to participate in it. And why I'm telling you this long story is that I went in, kind of like a 16-year-old, full of enthusiasm and thinking how wonderful it was going to be to actually have him regularly at rehearsals. Are there any other Arthur Miller fans here? Anybody love Arthur Miller? I think when he works, it's so hot. Anyway, so here we are. We're in London. It's Tom Conti. I don't know if you know his work. Tom Conti's actually starring in the play, and we've got Arthur Miller literally sitting in the room with us every day and going over the lines and changing things. And we screwed this man's play up so badly. It was so heartbreaking what we did to his play. And it was so extraordinary for me to think, well, if Arthur Miller can be here after all that he's contributed to the world of theater and the status that he has as a playwright, and if we can't get it right and show him due respect when he's in the room every day trying to help us, God spare me from ever writing a play. So maybe not.
Well, maybe it was because he was there.
No, I think not. I think that actors are sometimes belligerent and vain, and that what we are most preoccupied with is how we come across, and that we sometimes forget that the words and the story are more important than we are. And it is, I have to say, talking about that it's one of the problems that I have with acting. I stand before you and probably look kind of forthright and vain and stuff, but basically, as an artist, I'm retiring, and it's sometimes very difficult to participate with a group of people on a level of competitiveness that is so superficial and trying. I'm not talking now necessarily about companies like the New Theatre or the National Theatre or active working companies. I'm talking about the star system, and that, the star system's pretty heavy duty, and it's like a football pitch. You've really got to be out there and ready to dig elbows with the best of them. And that even in light of Arthur Miller, his play did not survive.
What play was this?
It was The Ride Down Mount Morgan. It was the first play he's written for 10 years, and it premiered in London at the Wyndham's Theatre. And I have to tell you a really silly thing, is when they put plays in books, you always have the first cast playing. And there I was with my own book. I was so excited when they published this book, and here was my name as the nurse. And I had the tiniest part, I want to tell you again. It was one of those things you spend the night in the dressing room. But there I was in the book. So anyway.
So you mentioned Arthur Miller. Who else do you like as a writer? What other writers do you like?
Oh gosh, Jenny, that's such a big question.
Just name one.
I love Zora Neale Hurston. I love Tennessee Williams. I love Carson McCullers. I have to say, and I say this because language is really important to me. One of the things that happened to me as an actress is that when you have the good fortune, this is the good side of acting, when you have the good fortune of working with very evolved directors, they can take you through a text and make you feel that you've never read before, that you are learning how to approach the written word for the first time. And I was really lucky, particularly while I was at the National, to work with some great directors. I can remember as a 14-year-old thinking that Shakespeare was a load of twat, and why they made the fuss about him was merely because his work still existed and he was an old name. But I have actually worked with people that gave me a respect for the antiquity of the English language and what he had to say about it and in it. And I recently did a production of Othello with the Royal Shakespeare Company with Ian McKellen starring in it. And I have to say that I came out of that production just feeling that maybe Shakespeare was the first feminist writer. He did things with that play that were with the women speaking parts, and we know that he doesn't write really for women, that were just extraordinary, really extraordinary. Have you figured out about me? You ask me one question, I answer another. Sorry. Drive interviewers mad. Does anybody have a question? Yes.
When you were in Hair, which would have been in the early 60s.
No, mid-60s.
Sorry. They brought a whole airplane full of the actors and actresses from Hair to Holland.
Oh, yes.
You were among them?
I was not among them because by that time, my little splurt in the show had been so successful that I'd been discovered by this Kit Lambert recording producer and was no longer with the show. So I love telling this story because Hair has been minimalized. Is that right? Minimalized. In that, in England, I recently went back to England to do a program for London Weekend Television about the 60s. And they talked about hair, and it's, the nudity in hair became its preoccupation. And what disturbed me about this is that, in fact, it was a very politically conscious statement about youth, about anti-war, about multi-religions, about traveling out of yourself and traveling to other countries. And I think that what's sad historically is that we got so carried away with that 30 seconds of nudity in the blue light that everybody's forgotten about that. Yeah? So for those young people who sit in the audience who, by the way, don't know what hair is, and I have to say, I've just met a gentleman here tonight. Well, he's more than a gentleman. He's the British consul, whose daughter went to school with my daughter, and whose daughter goes to the school my daughter went to. And the highlight of her time at Bedales was when she came and said, "Mom, we're doing hair as the school play." This is absolutely true. And I said, "All right, let me get my clothes out." And I have a picture of my daughter, aged 17, standing up in my hair outfit at Bedales singing in the school play. So there you are. Any other questions? No impertinences? No. Yes?
You talked about acting and writing and getting responses from audiences, particularly from England.
Yes.
Would you like to develop that theme in light of what Alec Guinness said recently?
What did he say? And I'll tell you.
Well, I think he said words to the effect that he was sick and tired of acting not in the National Theatre but in the West End.
Yeah.
And having to perform to masses of tourists who he knew perfectly well, didn't understand what it was about.
Yeah, well, you know, what happens with it, we have several members of the new, is it called the New Theatre? The New Amsterdam
The
Theatre?
New Amsterdam,
Yeah, of which Jenny is a member. We have members here tonight, and I think that there really are several different acting experiences. One is a theater acting experience. One is television. One is film. Those are entirely different because the politic of the work that goes on there is entirely different. I mean, for example, in the West End, you have to have a name in this, depressed economic community that we live in. You have to have a big name to draw an audience in. So, and Alec Guinness will go into the West End because perhaps without him the theater would be dark and be closed. When you have a wonderful edifice like the National Theatre, and I'm a great supporter of theater, emotional supporter of theater companies, because what happens in a theater company is that the star status is broken down. If you have some sort of subsidy, and the English have to be given credit for the amount of theatrical subsidy that it had for its companies through the 70s, which allowed those companies to become as strong as they now are. You can afford to do Moliere, you can afford to do Shakespeare, but I guarantee you put some of those productions that run at the National Theatre of the Royal Shakespeare Company in the West End, and the West End would now be dark. I see a young lady in the audience who interviewed me today, and I think she was a little horrified because while I was talking about the book business, I was saying, you've got to write books that are going to make money. And it sounded like I had no respect for the art of writing. But what I was trying to explain, and a dear friend here, Yvonne Twisk, is here from Penguin, if you don't sell books, there's no book publisher. And the book publisher needs to sell books to stay in business. So one would like to, whether it's, as the gentleman speaks about Alec Guinness's feeling about the West End, one would love to be preoccupied with pure art. But I think it's Marlon Brando talking about film acting in the 50s, who says that, this is commerce. You can call it art if you want to, but what people are actually out there doing is trying to make a buck. I went to the Van Gogh museum today, and you look around at the immense I mean, it's an unspeakable talent there. And think that that man's art did not survive to provide him with a living while he lived, that without his brother, you know, he would have starved. I think there's just like a really weird, fine, unfortunate balance between art and commerce. And it's hard to get it right. And I have to say for Alec Guinness, he could act anywhere he wanted to. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure they'll have him at the National Theatre if he gives them a call.
Your book, Joy, is not free. It's not really about homosexuality, but it has a sort of a gay theme.
Yes.
Why are there so few so-called African American writers writing on
The gay thing? Well, obviously James Baldwin did a really good job. I have to say, you know, there are African Americans here in the audience that are invited to shoot me down if you disagree. I actually think we come from a very homophobic community, that homosexuality within the community of color in America is an uneasy one. And one of the things that I address in Free, and think about this, if there was sexual abuse during the period of slavery, and, you know, I stand here an image of sexual abuse. I mean, we can deny till the cows come home, but my hair's not growing down my back because I'm from, you know, a West African tribe. And what I address in this book is that we talk about the visibility of sexual abuse, but what about homosexual abuse? Homosexuality didn't start in 1947. Do you know what I mean? Homosexuality is written about biblically. And I address this in the book. And yes, you're right, my book is not about a homosexual love affair, it's really an unrequited love.
Is the book
Ellen.
out in the States already?
No, it comes out in the States in January. And I expect to get beaten up for it. Seriously.
What you said about the homophobic, I don't know much about the black community in the United States, but I know some rappers who are into rap music.
Yeah.
And it's really astonishing the level of gay bashing lyrics that goes around at this time of day.
Yeah.
Truly. And I don't know how much it says about the whole community, but I really am curious about how this book will be
received. I have to say proudly that the English gay community, the literary community, has received it very well. No, I mean, I don't want to bring the evening down, but I will say that I think that the general media reaction to AIDS has encouraged homophobia in a way that is rather startling in the 90s. When I went to Berkeley in '64, I'm 46, yeah, and when I went to Berkeley in '64, the few gay friends that I had there had to be closeted because homosexuality in '64 in the United States was still illegal. You could still be arrested for it. And it was really exciting for me to see the liberation, to see that relaxed. And it's equally horrifying for me now to see some reversion to that. Any case, somebody asked me something light. Rob.
Is there a big difference between the rock and roll scene when you did rock and roll business and the literary scene at the moment?
I'm going to repeat it. Did everybody hear this? He says, is there a difference between the rock and roll scene and the literary scene? I have to say, economically, very little. They were whores there, we're whores here. It's kind of all the same. No. I think something wonderful happened happened to music in the 60s. And largely was very lucky that I was too broke to get to Paris and got stopped in England and arrested there with my musical growth. Because one of the things that happened that I was ignorant of was here I was, this American coming from Berkeley, having grown up in Philadelphia, which was very much a musical center during the 50s because of a show called American Bandstand. And there I went off, came to England, and what was extraordinary was the English musicians had such an appreciation and knowledge of black blues that I was able to discover a musical culture that was supposed to be my own, and I had to travel, 6,000 miles out of California to discover it. One of the things that was very important in the 60s, which is now overlooked, is that a lot of those people, whether it was Dylan, whether it was, Donovan, whether it was Mick, whoever you want to attribute as being, the greatest contributor, what the lyrics were at those times were political flags in a slightly different way than I think rap is now. That we definitely used music as a political platform, and that the Joan Baez's and folk singers, who are kind of poo-pooed now as being old hat, were actually saying things and committing themselves politically, whether it was to marches or to concerts or to whatever, and that is not happening now. I have to say, feel that it's happening less in the book market than it was in the music market. I'm not really in the book business yet. I'm only just starting, so I actually have a greater understanding of rock and roll. It embarrasses me to even say rock and roll, but I lived through it. But no, there's not a lot similar happening, I can assure you. I'm going to take the lady in the orange and then I'll take you.
Okay, thank you. When you speak, it's very free-flowing, very spontaneous. Does your writing follow in that same style, very free and flowing and come pouring out of you? Or, in other words, what is the process of your writing?
The pits. I'll tell you quickly. I live in this house that I live in. It's an old house. And it's particularly because of buildings like this in Germantown and loving old houses that I settled into a community which is the Western Front, known as the Western Front during the First World War. And I live in this old house and I live by myself, and I used to write to people and say how delightful it was to be isolated and with my typewriter, and this was in 89. And then in 90, I was still writing, oh, it's so delicious, and the flowers, and our garden. And then 91 came, and I was, still about how wonderful it was. If the John Adams Institute had not brought me out of France the other day, I might have shot myself. Because there are days when the blank page totally devastates you, and all you can put on that blank page is 3 sentences. And yes, it's easy. Basically, see, I'm more a performer than a writer, yes? So it's easy for me to stand and talk to you and not be embarrassed about my words. And yet maybe if somebody unkindly recorded this, I'd want to shoot myself tomorrow. But what happens with the writing process for me is I want to say things which take a very long time to be refined down to what I mean. So you write a sentence and you think on Tuesday that you wrote what you meant, and you go back on the Saturday and look at the sentence and you realize it totally missed your intention. And that's why it scared me the first time I wrote, because I just thought you wrote what you said. And you hear about these people who they talk into a tape recorder. Well, if even Jackie Collins can talk a book into a tape recorder, she's going to get to heaven. You know what I mean? Because it's a miracle that one can be able to do it. No, it's not easy, and the process for me is tortured. And I have to say, I hope I'm working on book 4, and please God, it comes easier than these other 3.
So you do a lot of rewriting, complicating, and cutting away.
The worst. Can look at a sentence 15 times.
As you read your autobiography, when you were writing that, did you base that entirely on memory, or did you have notes? Did you speak to old friends?
No, I based it on tears. I based it on, checking out what I had not seen, checking out. Listen, we'll all have this experience. Are there any orphans here before I go here? Are there any orphan people here? Because I don't want to be insensitive. Okay, we know our mothers, yeah? And who your mother was to you at 5 becomes an entirely different person to who your mother is to you at 15. Becomes an entirely different person to who your mother is to you at 46. And what I found incredibly painful when I was writing about my mother was at 5, I thought my mother was God. I thought she was the prettiest woman in the street. She blew bubbles better than anybody who had ever had chewing gum in their mouth. She could jump double Dutch when other mothers didn't jump double Dutch. By the time I was 14, I thought she was this enormous pain. And by the time I'd become a mother myself, making a phone call to her was like I was doing her some kind of favor. And it was very painful for me as a human being to look at this changing relationship with my mother and realize that she was not the only horror in the picture, that I was also a horrible person, Why did I start telling you this?
I was asking if you based your autobiography entirely on memory. And
No, you have to, you're standing back and you're coming in, and you're standing back and you're coming in. And I have to say, by the way, that wasn't a bit of cuteness. I think I'm menopausal, so sometimes in the middle of the sentence, it's like, oh, where am I? What was I doing? It's the worst in the world. Anyway. Some of it is memory. None of it was letters and I don't have very many childhood photographs, so very few of it was childhood photographs either, things like that. I'm going to ask you a question. Largely, you're not a Danish audience, is that true? Dutch. You can't take me anywhere. largely you're not a Dutch audience. Is this the kind of thing? It's always I find extraordinary because I feel like some sort of lunatic who sits at home and never comes out for an intellectual evening. Do you always come to things like this? No? I'm sort of relieved because you know what I mean. I nearly was going to travel to see Toni Morrison speak, but there are not a lot of people I'd come to see speak, and I just didn't know whether you heard nobody was going to be here, so you came out of sympathy, or anyway. Yes? Did somebody over here have a question? Yes.
Ask how many Dutch people are here.
How many Dutch people are here? Oh, right! For the Danish.
How many Danish are there?
How many Danish? Boys. And that is nearly true. I had an English professor called Tom Gunn, who was an English poet. And I was at his class more than there was class because he was really kind of adorable and turned up on motorcycles and stuff like that. And I do have to say, unfortunately, at 18 and 19 years old, my political interests were genuine. My academic interests were involved with the fact that my mother wanted me to have a degree, and that I heard that you couldn't live in the world without a degree, so I was there. But cute boys could kind of steer me in the wrong direction.
The second question I was going to ask is if you graduated, but never mind.
No. I didn't graduate, and the pathetic thing is, and this is about my relationship with my mother, is that my mother still is asking me when am I going back to university. And I want to go, excuse me, that was 6 years ago. Can you please let me out of this one now? And what makes that difficult is that at 68, she did go back to university and put herself through 4 years of a Berkeley education. And so she can't say to me, I can't say to her, I'm too old, because she's already beaten me down. Yes?
How do you feel about Spike Lee and what he's up to?
Well, I think that the Malcolm X picture is a picture that, when I hear that it was 20 years in development, I'm delighted that it's been made. I think that he's very talented. I think he functions in the most cutthroat of economic arenas, which is what Hollywood is, and that if you want to compete on that level, you have to compete on that level in the way that he's doing so, and I wish him every success. And I also hope that he doesn't become so successful with major box office invested pictures, which require $36 million, that he loses sight of his original artistry that didn't need that kind of money.
Is the Malcolm X picture sponsored, or is it his own money?
No, I mean, I think it's Hollywood money. It's 36 million put together by different distributors and manufacturers. And Hollywood's hard. I functioned there for 3 years in the 70s, and it's funny talking about it because it's not as though you're here looking at an actress whose work that you hear about, although Rob Malish says he saw me in The Sender the other night, and I was kind of embarrassed about that. Playing a nurse. I have played every form of nurse, by the way, in existence. I have been English nurses in Britannia Hospital. I have been psychiatric nurses. I was a nurse in the Arthur Miller play. It's just too sick.
Will you be going back to the Royal Shakespeare Company when you feel like getting into acting a little bit more, or do you intend to spend all your time with books?
Well, I wish one could make this choice. The Royal Shakespeare Company has to call me. I don't call them, I can assure you. The problem with the Royal Shakespeare Company basically is that you have to live near Stratford to be part of the company, and that is very isolating. When I wrote Joy, this is a great story I'll share with you. When I wrote this book, and you heard me read, and how ethnic and whatnot it was. By night, I'm in this Shakespeare play speaking Shakespeare, and by day, I'm living in Chipping Camden, which could not have been more English, more quaint, more quiet, more... Yeah, I think we're all right, Jimmy, thank you. You don't get to choose, and I hope that I get asked again, and I hope to do a good production. I don't want to give up acting. The isolation that comes with writing that's really hard work. And you can hear I'm a chatterbox, so if you can imagine 3 months of living by yourself and not having the phone ring and not having anybody come get you get pretty sort of skitsy and crazy. Yes, Diane.
I'm interested about your sort of relationship to your location. You talked about the States and not going back. Almost, it sounded to me like you didn't want to go back because of how you feel about it. And I'd like to ask about what England gave you. It sounded like it was very nourishing for you there. But then you said something about you couldn't write there, and what does France give you?
Okay. Well, it's all easy. First, I have to say, and I said this to you earlier, it's something that I've discovered with gardening. You can take a plant, you can take little seedlings, all from the same seed box, and distribute them around the garden in different light spaces, heat spaces, whatever. And where you've put one and you think, oh, that's not going to do well there, it might thrive. And where you put another one expecting it to do well, the little seed may never grow. Now, for some reason, I responded to the English, and the English responded to me. And it was really the place that I needed to be and that I found nourishing. The things that were important to me, language, history of buildings, all that was a richness there. The fact that I was working in the music business with people who really respected the blues gave me something that I was not given when I was living in Berkeley. Yeah. What happened when I moved from London to the coast? This was crazy. Was I moved from London to a place called Folkestone, which is down on the coast, on the East Kent coast of England, and I did that so that I would be isolated, so that I wouldn't have the temptation to talk, because if I'm too tempted to talk, I don't sit down and write. And that's how France came into my life, because from my kitchen window at night, I could see this like little diamante necklace between the sky and the sea that were the lights of France from my Kent window. And it's so extraordinary. A builder came one day, and it was very clear, and you could actually see France. You know, it was there, and it was sharp, and it was clear. And I used to pray that at some stage I would get over there. And I started that praying in 1986, and by 1989 I owned a piece of it. And I loved the French as much as I loved the English. I love their language. I love the fact that their language is not my language yet. There's a character that I've worked out in Free, an African character, who is the grandmother of Tinashe. And one of the things that, maybe the strongest thing that has shaped her personality, and imagine this, try to put yourself in this position, whatever language it is that you speak, that you are taken hostage from your home as a small child to a country where the language, the climate, the clothes, the nuances, the food, nothing is in any way familiar to you. And instead of being taught the language, growing into the language, as we do if we learn another language, you're put out with the animals, so that the only thing you hear are animal sounds. Nobody ever teaches you the language of this place, and then eventually you get it through aggressive orders that are given to you. Scrub the floor, cook the dinner, yes? And that you become an old person in this environment where language was never something shared with you. And I feel so strongly, I have to say, about that, talking about this here in Holland, where the thing that strikes me as something so unique about you as a people, and I'm not saying this to be complimentary, I'm saying it because I think the world has a great deal to learn from you. To be multilingual means that you share cultures with people, you share their literature, you share the air that they breathe in a way that you can't when you do not speak a language. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been anywhere where you don't speak anything. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me today. I told this girl at the back. I got into a taxi cab to go to the Kaiserspach. Is that what it's called? Yes. And on my way, the cab driver stopped. Now I'm at the Sonesta Hotel. And on my way, the cab driver stops, picks up a guy in the street, He jumps in the front of the cab. Excuse me, I'm sitting in the back with my little flowers and bag. He jumps in the cab. They have a conversation. I say I want 231 Kaiser Gewachsgesagt, and I try to say it in my best, Dutch. And he drives all around willy-nilly, brings me finally to the house. I see it's 11 guilders on the meter. I tell him to take a little tip. He keeps 15, right? Now, wait. This is not a horrible story. I didn't die in the car, do you know what I mean? But I have to say that as I got in the car, because he knew that I had no language, he was prepared, however good he is as a human being normally, to take advantage of me. And however tough you may perceive me to be standing here on the stage today, I was weakened by my inability to express myself, so that yes, I was taken advantage of. Yes?
Well, he probably speaks English.
And he spoke a little tack.
But not today.
He nearly got his butt in trouble there. But what I want to say is, so imagine, now I speak about the African American experience. Imagine a race of people denied language, yes? And I write about this woman, and the first time she responds naturally is when something so horrible happens in her experience that she doesn't even remember the words that she should speak, because by now a stretch of 70 years has separated her from the language that she would have forgotten. All she can remember is how to cry, and how her tribe used to bang their head on the ground when they cried. Well, that's shocking. I mean, I speak now to a room of people, many of whom are multilingual, and I'm telling you, imagine what it was like if not only you had no English, no French, no German, you had no Dutch. And it makes animals of us. And that when I write this book about this woman who becomes a violent and angry woman, I think about 1992 in Los Angeles and riots, and I see images that depict us as a violent people, us, we African Americans, and it's startling to me because when one looks back and creates a character and tries to empathize with how that anger builds up, and how through the generations of mothering you pass that anger and that ignorance on. Don't ask me how LA happened in 1992. Isn't it written on the wall? And when will America stop denying its history? When will we, as Black Americans, stop denying that we are also part Dutch, part German, part Indian? When will we stop being embarrassed about the rape and accept that, yes, we are now products of that. We represent that. That, yes, you are my brother because your skin is my color, but she may be my sister because who knows what my history is. Got carried ahead.
Okay, well, on that note, I think we should
She's
close
good.
off.
Thank
Close off the
you very
evening.
much for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Marsha and Jenny. I'm glad you didn't shoot yourself. You came here and never will. You made a very special evening tonight, and I felt it was going to be a very special evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Have a good trip home. You will have a very happy reunion tomorrow with your daughter. I hope that will be perfect. The next lecture will be David Levitt, the 9th of December. Please go home, and thank you very much for being here.